Thank you for the introduction and good morning, everyone. Like Ravi said, my name is Krysta Morrissey and I'll be presenting data from two of my PhD research projects that I carried out in Scotland as part of a collaboration between the University of Guelph and Scotland's Rural College, or otherwise known as SRUC. So commercial flocks of laying hens are often prone to high levels of feather pecking and cannibalism. This is important for bird welfare as well as production efficiency, as it can cause pain, increase feed intake, as well as reduce egg production and increase mortality. Beak treatment, or beak trimming, is currently the most effective and reliable method of reducing the damage caused by feather pecking. The English government had set out to ban beak trimming in 2016 across the UK, but this was just recently cancelled, but the potential for future bans may be in place. So this is what is happening in the UK as well as some other European countries. There is a tendency for welfare trends to come across North America based on what's happening in Europe. Granted, this might be a few years down the line. And currently there is no pressure within Canada at the moment to ban beak trimming. At the moment, there is very little information on how to house hens in furnished cages, and even less information on how to manage non-beak trimmed hens in these same systems. And this is important given that there are more than half of the eggs produced in the UK come from hens housed in furnished cages. And the use of furnished cages within North America, especially in Canada, may increase quite dramatically in the next few years. So feather pecking is a multifactorial problem with a wide range of causal factors. Beak treatment itself doesn't actually alleviate the underlying issues, so having a non-trimmed flock means that we need to directly assess these causal factors a bit more in depth. So today I'll be presenting some of the key results from two of my PhD studies. In the first study, we looked at the effects of breed, beak treatment, and extra enrichment on mortality, behavior, and feather cover on a commercial farm in Scotland. And the second study, we carried over the extra enrichment and assessed their effects in combination with two dietary alterations. And we chose these dietary alterations because fiber level increases the amount of time spent eating and could also reduce or satisfy more closely the hen's foraging needs. In addition, contrary to popular belief, hens are actually omnivores, and potentially a purely vegetarian diet may not actually be entirely suitable for poultry. So for the first experiment, we used a 2x2x2 factorial with three factors, the first being breed, so we used two brown feathered strains, the first one being Highline Brown and the second being a Lowman Classic Brown. The second factor was beak treatment, so half of the birds had been trimmed at the hatchery and the other half were left intact. And the final factor was enrichment, so half of the hens were housed in a furnished cage that had extra environmental enrichments, including ropes, pecking mats, and beak blunting boards, and the other half of the birds were just housed in a standard furnished cage. Each of these treatment combinations had 8 replicate cages, and each of the cages housed 80 birds per cage. So for the results, 2 of the Lowman non-trimmed cages actually had to be removed prematurely from the study due to high pecking-related mortality. So if we include all of the birds from those 2 cages into the mortality data, we actually do see an effect of beak treatment on mortality, where the non-trimmed birds had almost 4 times the mortality rate that the trimmed birds had. There also was a significant breed effect, with the Lowmans having higher mortality than the Highlines. And conversely, there was no effect due to enrichment. Both the Lowmans and non-trimmed hens had worse feather cover as time progressed than their Highline and trimmed counterparts. In addition, the Lowman hens performed more bird-to-bird pecks, and this is in line with the feather cover and mortality data. Extra enrichment also reduced bird-to-bird pecks, but this did not correspond with the mortality or feather cover data. In addition, the Lowman and non-beak trimmed hens also caused more damage to the enrichments. For the second study, we also had a 2x2x2 factorial, and the first 2 factors were dietary alterations, which I touched on previously, where half the hens were fed a control diet and the other half were fed a diet that had 5% pork meat and bone meal. And for the second factor, with fiber level, half the birds again were fed a control diet and the other half were fed a diet that was diluted by the addition of 10% oat hulls. And the final factor was environmental enrichment, which was similar to study 1, though we did modify the size and shape of the enrichments. Again, we had 8 cages per treatment, but this time the cages were smaller, housing only 21 birds per cage. So for this study, we had quite low mortality rate of 0.7% up to 35 weeks of age. and we didn't see any differences between the treatments. In contrast to study 1, we did actually see an improvement in feather cover with the extra enrichments, though this was slight. We didn't actually see an overall treatment effect for bird-to-bird pecking, but the high fiber diets and the extra enrichment did reduce spot pecking, which could indicate a reduction in foraging frustration. And the pecks at the enrichment increased with age, which meant that the enrichments kept their attractiveness over time. So just in summary, quick summary, I've already got the red flag here. Beak trimming, of course, not surprisingly, did reduce feather damage as well as mortality and bird-to-bird pecking. But again, if we can get the mortality rate down, but we still see high feather damage, is that going to be acceptable to the consumer? So we have to kind of take all of the welfare indices together as one. Obviously, there was a breed effect, and it's important to choose a suitable breed for the housing system that you have in place. The inclusion of enrichments had varied results between the two studies, and this may have been due to the modifications that we had put in place from study 1 to study 2, but it could also be due to the group size between the two cages. Though we did see a reduced spot pecking with the fiber, which is beneficial to welfare, the diets there was very few other effects of the diets, but this may have been masked by the fact that we had such good performance with this final flock. So with that, I would like to thank my funders and the people who helped me carry out my data collection, and thank you for your time this morning.